Hello there, everyone. I am Aaron St. Dennis, the FF Mad Scientist, and this is the Mad Science Lab podcast. Today we're continuing on with Studs and Duds, and with me today is a very special guest. We have CBS Sports host, analyst, Heath Cummings. Heath, thank you for joining me.
You know, the nice thing is you can't go wrong whether you say host or analyst, because I am an analyst at
Dynasty.
CBS at Fantasy Football Today. I am the host of Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. So
Yeah.
saying both was the correct way. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this talk.
Yeah, I caught myself in between there because I went to say FFT Dynasty, and then I kind of merged the two, and I just got caught in no man's land there. But
I do that. Like I like to make fun of Azer for his intros and his outros. But one thing I've learned over the past couple of months since we launched Fantasy Football Today Dynasty is that it's not near as easy as it seems. And I often get halfway into saying something and think, did I want to say it just like that, and do that same thing? So I totally understand.
I've been on a few podcasts recently where I didn't have to host, and it was so much easier. They're clicking all the buttons, and then you get in one where you're not the host and you take over like you are the host. I record on my days off multiple episodes to release.
Mm-hmm.
So you can tell on the days where I've recorded 4 or 5 in a row, I'm lucky if I get my own name out properly, let alone my guest's name. So I've talked myself in complete circles. So hopefully we'll be on our A game today. I always start with this, and I feel stupid saying this for you, but would you like to take a minute to tell everyone where they can find you, as if they don't know?
I wouldn't take anything for granted at all. You can find me. I was going to say where you can find me on Twitter, but I don't know if you can find anything on Twitter today. You can find me at cbssports.com on the fantasy page. I do redraft content as well. I'll produce a mountain of redraft content in season and in July and August. But if you go to the top right-hand corner of the fantasy football page, you'll find our Dynasty Central, which is where majority of my off-season work is located. We've got updated rankings just in the last week. We've got Dynasty tiers, a Dynasty trade chart, Dynasty mock drafts. And then as you said, as you referenced, we just added Fantasy Football Today Dynasty, which is currently in the regular Fantasy Football Today feed, but you can watch that on YouTube at 11 a.m. Eastern every Tuesday.
I appreciate merging that with the regular FFT feed. For about the first 3-4 weeks, it was only a YouTube exclusive. Yep. I listen at work, and it was driving me nuts. I'd have to drive around with my phone open to YouTube on the screen, and it was killing my battery. So when you finally merged it, I said, yes, I can listen. So
I appreciate that level of dedication.
Yeah. So what do you prefer? You find yourself playing more Dynasty or redraft? What's your preference?
I have more redraft leagues still. I definitely prefer Dynasty, and I'm kind of weird in this way. And I think this is kind of a good indication of whether, if you haven't gotten into it yet, if this sounds dumb, then maybe you shouldn't. But I enjoy both sides of the journey in Dynasty so much. A couple of years ago, I'd been to the championship game in 2 out of 3 seasons, could not get over the hump, had Derrick Henry and Melvin Gordon and a bunch of old running backs. Funny, Derrick Henry's still good. But I just tore the whole thing down and was terrible for 2 years and really enjoyed that part of the process. And now have a team with Garrett Wilson and Drake London and Devontae Smith and Patrick Mahomes, and it's time to start winning again. But my favorite part of Dynasty is that you can have a bad team and it still be really enjoyable because you're building towards something.
No, I completely agree. I did my first Dynasty League at work maybe 4 years ago, and I went win now in the startup, and it was like I had Brady in what was essentially his last usable year. And then by about mid-season, like I was really good. I think it was 6-1 or something. In week 7, I had Robert Woods go down. I had then Antonio Brown ran naked across the field. And I had nobody left for a 6-1 team. And I actually, when I tore it down, it looked terrible. I've had more fun rebuilding it since and stockpiling picks. I drafted 9 first-round picks this year. I'm sure it's a terrible strategy, but it was so much fun. So I really enjoy it. So
Well, that's one thing about the dynasty community is they will always tell you that you shouldn't pick all those guys this year because next year's class is going to be
Yeah,
so much
they
better.
will.
But I'm feeling pretty good about Garrett Wilson and Drake London right now.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. Well, I guess I shouldn't talk your ear off here. We can probably get right into it. Your first player is one of your studs. We have Tennessee receiver Treylon Burks, finished as wide receiver 78 last year, battled some injuries, 47 rushing yards, 444 receiving, one touchdown, 91.1 full PPR points, good for 8.55 per game. Currently going on Fantasy Pros exactly where he finished as wide receiver 78. I'm going to call a quick improv here and see where he is on NFC. And of course, my phone is going off because why wouldn't it be? He is falling. What did I say? 78?
78th overall, I think, is where he
Yeah.
was on Fantasy Pros. Yeah.
He's 91 overall on NFC, wide receiver 34. What is it about Burks that you like?
Well, I think like it's not last year because, and I will acknowledge at the very start, like betting on rookie wide receivers who are bad as rookies has not been a profitable endeavor for a while now. But I think there's pretty good reasons for Burks. He obviously had the conditioning issues last offseason. Turned out he had some asthma problems, had some injuries throughout the year. About the time that he got fully acclimated into the offense is when Ryan Tannehill got hurt. And he played the last month of the season as a full-time player finally, but with Malik Willis and Joshua Dobbs. And so I'm willing to just give Burks a pass on what he did last year. I think if you go back to what he did at Arkansas, it's a very similar thing to what he's going to be asked to do at Tennessee. He absolutely dominated targets, yards, touchdowns. More than 30% of the team's passing yards accounted for by Treylon Burks. More than 30% of the team's passing touchdowns accounted for by Treylon Burks. I think we get a bounce back from Ryan Tannehill. And if Tannehill's just washed or gets hurt again, I think Will Levis is a much better backup option than Dobbs and Malik Willis last year. They added nothing. In fact, they subtracted Robert Woods. The number 2 and number 3 wide receivers on this Titans team right now are Kyle Phillips and Nick Westbrook. And Chigo Okonkwo, everybody loves as a breakout tight end, but he was basically a part-time player playing 50% of the snaps last year. If Burks can be the guy he was at Arkansas, he can again on an NFL team account for 30% of the receiving production on this team. And that would be good enough to give him, he's not A.J. Brown, but he could have A.J. Brown in Tennessee type numbers this year.
Do you think the Titans scheme him up strictly as a receiver? I hate to make the comparison, but at Arkansas, he was basically a Debo role. Like they got him the ball any way they possibly could.
Yeah, I think he will have certainly more rushing yards than the average wide receiver does. I don't think it will be a full Debo situation. If I had to guess the number of rush attempts, like maybe what we've seen from Tyreek Hill, where he has 16, 17, 18 rushes, maybe one per game. But I do think that Burks has some ability with the ball in his hands when he's healthy to turn those into big plays and touchdowns like Debo has.
All right, I've got the NFC ADP up on my screen here. This is typically the range where I like to start going with some of the younger upside receivers. Burks, I'm not big on Pickens. Dotson, if you really want JSN and Jordan Addison. What do you think of him in this range here at 34, wide receiver 34, 91st overall?
I mean, I absolutely love it, and it's about 15 spots below where I've got him. So I think he's a top 24 wide receiver this year. I'm all in on that second year class, except for I agree with you on the one guy that you said you weren't as excited about, George Pickens. I'm not as excited about him, but Burks, Watson, Wilson, Olave, London, obviously, Jahan Dotson, love him in that range. But I'm fine with Treylon Burks. Definitely, like, I think I might be fine with him higher than this, but there's no reason to take him before round 6. I'm okay with him in round 6.
I loved Pickens. Pickens just scares me a bit. It seems like he's being inflated by those OBJ type catches. So I find myself taking Deontay in the range. Normally, that's my last question per player, but I want to make you feel at home here. So I'm going to ask you, how does Treylon Burks affect the New York Giants?
Well, I do think he would be the best wide receiver on the New York Giants, but I do like him more with Ryan Tannehill than I would if he was playing with Daniel Jones.
Okay, well, I wanted to make sure we could reference Daniel Jones on the podcast. It felt wrong to not do so.
I like a man who does his homework.
I do. I've been listening for years. Who would you like to talk next? Do you want your other stud?
Oh, let's stick with the stud, yeah.
All right.
I think this one I have an even better case on, so.
I love this one. We have Vegas running back Josh Jacobs, finished as RB3 last year, 1,653 rushing yards, 400 through the air, 12 touchdowns, 353.3 full PPR points, good for 19.25 per game. Current ADP is 19th overall on Fantasy Pros. I am going to try and find him on here.
The idea though that in any format, Josh Jacobs is not going in the first round. I just like I can jump on my high horse immediately. And
Yeah.
just say he should be a first round pick in dynasty. He should be a first round pick in non PPR. He should be first round pick in full PPR. I mean, maybe in super flex. If there's a big super flex representation in that data, I could understand him not being a first round pick.
He is 24.77 in ADP. That puts him as running back 8 behind Barkley, Chubb, Pollard, and one spot ahead of Henry.
And I just like you look at the running back position, and I have a real fear that like 5 years from now, the idea of a running back getting 300 touches is just like, remember when that used to happen? Because the guys who have done it, for the most part, Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey, like those guys are all 26, 27, 28, 29 in Henry's case. Josh Jacobs, 25 years old, still a year younger than Tony Pollard, who's never had a 250 touch season, much less 350 touches. When you look at those backs from last year who were the true workhorse, the top 6 or 7 running backs, Jacobs and Ramondre Stevenson are the only guys who are not at an age where you'd be concerned or have an injury history where you'd be concerned. Now, the difference for me between Jacobs and Stevenson is we've seen Jacobs in that role before. We've seen him produce as a top 12 running back before. We went into last year drafting Damian Harris ahead of Ramondre Stevenson. He's my number 2 running back in PPR. He's my number 1 running back in non-PPR. I think he's one of the safest bets to see 20 touches per game this season.
I'm glad you brought up Pollard in Dynasty because that's the case I always make. He's younger than Pollard and has a bigger role. He's had better seasons. I don't get why Pollard is going ahead of him, but just, I 100% agree.
Yeah, the funny thing is that people will say, well, Josh Jacobs has never really done what he did last year. Well, Tony Pollard had never come close to doing what he did last year. And what Tony Pollard did last year was very similar to what Josh Jacobs had done before last year.
Yeah. It's amazing. I'm not quite sure why. I'm glad you're in here and you're as high on Jacobs as I am. But a lot of the people I talk with, they say, he won't do what he did last year. Look at the share he got last year. It was just a contract year and they were running him into the ground. What do you think this is? He's on the franchise tag. It's a contract year.
Zamir White is still the number 2 running back. The biggest threats in the passing game are Amir Abdullah and Brandon Bolden. And everybody knows that those guys are not actual threats.
Yeah. If you needed any more case for Jacobs, you just said it right there. The biggest threats are Amir Abdullah and Zamir White. So we'll get this switched over here. I'll bring up the NFC screen. It always takes so long, but sorry about that.
No, I just, and I have been a Jacobs guy before. I think people underestimate what Jacobs did before when they're saying he's never done this, because he's almost being ranked at what he was before last season.
Yeah, he's 24 right here. As I said, so the top 5 I agree with there, but then we've got Chubb, Pollard, Jacobs, Najee below him, Henry, Stevenson, Hall, and ETN, and I'd prefer him to any of them. I'm going to bring up the overall position ranking.
I do not understand the Nick Chubb either. Like, I know Kareem Hunt left, but Chubb's almost 3 years older than Josh Jacobs.
No, I think that's the case completely. They're just assuming he's going to get all the pass down work, but I think Cleveland's just going to find someone else to take it. In his range, it's basically the running backs we were talking about. You add in just above him, we've got Waddle, Devonta Smith, Chris Olave, Higgins, then we go to Burrow a bit. What do you think of him in this range, basically at the end of the second?
I think it's free money. He will not get to the end of the second in any draft that I'm in. I feel very happy taking him at the beginning of the second.
Yeah, I don't think I let him get that far in any of mine either. I think I drafted him in a Scott Fishbowl mock yesterday. He somehow fell to the 5th. So that's the definition of free money, and I'll take it.
Yep.
All right. For your first dud, who do you want?
Let's go with Jamison Williams just to get this out of the way, because this is the one that I am the least comfortable about. I know the production in college was spectacular, and yes, he did average 41 yards per catch last year. But I just don't feel like people are taking into account the fact that you actually have to play football to score fantasy points.
You mentioned this, though, with Burks, and I heard even someone describe it the other day with Lance. Typically, these young players who come out, and even if it's through no fault of their own, they don't really hit earlier in their career.
Right.
They just tend to bust. But I'll run through the card here. We have Detroit receiver Jamison Williams, finished as wide receiver 155, missed a good portion of the season, 40 rushing yards on one play, 41 receiving yards on one play, and that one touchdown. 18.1 fantasy points in PPR, 2.52 per game, currently going as 114 overall on Fantasy Pros. What do you think of him?
I think it's, and maybe in a league where you're taking him in round 10, you're okay just leaving him on your bench for the first 6 weeks. But I really wonder what people think is going to happen in week 7 when he's not been practicing with the team the entire season. And then he shows up to play and everybody else is in midseason form and has already established their target share. Because we know what happened last year. He had 6 games at the end of last year when they were mostly, not entirely, but mostly eliminated from the playoffs. I think they had like 4 wins at that point when he showed up in week 13. And he played 11% of the snaps, 19%, got up to 25% in one game. Earned more than one target in 2 games.
Wow. That's impressive.
What's I think it's more likely that the people that are drafting Jamison Williams are going to drop him. Not in the first 6 weeks. They'll probably have the patience to hold on through that. But then he's going to show up week 7 and he's not going to be a full-time player. And they're going to have somebody on bye the next week. And then you can pick him up off the waiver wire.
He is going on NFC as a borderline top 100 player at 101, wide receiver 44. Like this range we have, I'm not high on Gabe Davis or Cortland Sutton. Brandon Cooks is always unexciting, but I would pretty easily take all 3 of them. Quentin Johnston, Eli Moore, Michael Thomas. I mean, even if I don't like Michael Thomas, at least he's theoretically going to be on the field the first 6 weeks.
Right.
I mean, you never know with him. What do you think of this range here for Jamison?
Yeah, it's too soon for me. I don't think I'd probably want to take him before round 13 in redraft. And I'm even concerned in Dynasty because I don't know what happens to his value if I'm right and he shows up in the middle of the season and he's not a full-time player. I think we're going to see even his Dynasty value crash. So I'm waiting until round 13. I am interested in week 7 or week 8 if somebody drops him picking up Jamison Williams. And then seeing, but not at a round 10 pick, and certainly not ahead of any of those wide receivers you said.
Yeah, I've seen him go in a lot of drafts, not even Dynasty, just like even I get their mocks, but some of the SFB mocks where people are stashing him way too early. Why would you use a 8th round pick on a player that has done nothing? He's going to sit 6 weeks. And even when he comes back, he could put up 1 for 40 as a stat line. I don't understand what the point of 101 overall is here.
Right. No, not at all.
It doesn't seem like a bet that you could possibly win. So we will transition into our last one here, the other running back. I'm glad this is one of your duds. We have Dallas running back Tony Pollard, finished RB8, 1,007 rushing yards, 371 through the air, 12 touchdowns, 266.3 full PPR points, good for 15.55 per game, ADP of 22 overall on Fantasy Pros, which is getting out of hand. I feel like he is not being drafted at his ceiling. He's being drafted well above it. Everything, like even you seen in the middle of the game last year, they had the coaches on the sidelines talking. They don't talk like he's expected to be a full-time player. I don't think he can handle the workload, and I wouldn't be surprised if they don't bring Zeke back. What are your thoughts on Pollard?
I still expect somebody else to get signed, whether it be Zeke or Kareem Hunt or Dalvin Cook. The Cowboys have no need to rush. There's four, Leonard Fournette, there's four of the same guy out there. And all four of them are kind of slugs at this point in their career, and all four of them are probably better in short yardage than Tony Pollard. And so I think you're going to see. I don't know what people think a fair expectation for the total number of touches for Tony Pollard is, but I don't think it's a lot more than he had last year. Relatively certain there's going to be some touchdown regression after we saw him score 9 times on 193 rush attempts, and 3 times on 55 targets after scoring twice on 106 in his first 3 seasons. So I think the touchdown regression could make him a little bit worse. My bigger concern is that he's never shown the ability to handle a full workload. And last year, in the biggest workload he ever got, he suffered a pretty major lower leg injury at the end of the year. So I just don't think, I think you're right. He doesn't have the upside to be reasonable. He could have another outlandish touchdown season. But I don't think we should really expect that either when he's got a coach that's talking about how the offense's job is not just to score points, but to let the defense rest. Like, I think the Dallas offense is going to be worse than it was last year as well.
I think everyone makes the same mistake with Pollard that they made with Javonte. Throughout his career, Javonte profiles as a duo back.
Right.
He was a timeshare. I think that's what Pollard is, and I think his ceiling is what we seen last year, because whether it's Zeke or one of the journeyman backs you said, someone's going to come in and they're going to take a good portion of this workload. He's in for regression in pretty much every category. They added Brandon Cooks. As unexciting as it seems, it's still a step up from what they had last year. And I just can't possibly see how he meets this ADP, and I'm completely out on him. The most important question, though, how does Tony Pollard affect Daniel Jones?
I think he will help Daniel Jones by putting him in more negative game scripts, so that they will have to throw a little bit more. I think there's a chance that Daniel Jones will have his second season ever with more than 20 passing touchdowns.
That's awesome. I love how you took a joke question and gave an actual legitimate answer. That was very slick. I like that. So we've looked at this range here because he's going one above Jacobs, but from all the way, like even if we scroll down a bit to, 20, from 20 to 30, I don't think there's a player on this board that I wouldn't rather have than Tony Pollard. Is there anyone you can see here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm more okay with where he's going in terms of overall. I think amongst the running backs, and specifically compared to Josh Jacobs, and specifically in relation to Dynasty, because he's not young.
Yeah.
Like, those are the areas where I'm more concerned. Late second, early third, I'm okay with that. He's not getting, I mean, he's a high number second round pick in most of the drafts that I've done.
Yeah, this is where he's going in relation to just running backs. As I said, one spot ahead of Jacobs. Behind Barkley, Chubb, ahead of Jacobs, Henry, Najee, Stevenson. I think he's one of those guys where, because he's never been the bell cow, and this appears to be his first year as the lead back, people underestimate just how old he really is. So I think his dynasty value is basically a mirage, and anywhere I traded him this offseason.
I think that's the right play.
All right. Well, that's a wrap there, Heath. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm glad we could incorporate some New York Giants talk in here just to make you feel at home. I did my best.
Aaron, I thank you for having me, and I always appreciate the chance to talk about the New York Football Giants.
I know. I knew you would. I knew you would. Well, I figured it was either that or we were going to reminisce about dying on the hill together last year for DJ Moore.
Yes.
That went well for both.
I don't want to talk about that. So
New York Giants it is. So. All right, Heath. Well, you want to take one more chance here in case anybody doesn't know what you do? Where can they find you?
I'll just tell you thank you for having me on. Please be on the lookout for what we're doing with St. Jude's Children's Hospital over the next month. We've got our draft prep for charity going on. We're going to have all types of auction items that you can bid on to try to support St. Jude. We're going to have leagues that you can participate in. So we'll probably have a couple of shows that centered around that as well. So just keep an eye out for anything to do with fantasy football today and St. Jude, and help us raise some money for the kids.
My good Lord, like that dynasty spot, that got a little out of hand. I was like, oh, I think I'll go bid, see if I can throw a couple $100 in there. Where did it go? $21,000?
$21,000 to just harass Adam Azer in a dynasty league. It's well worth it.
I agree. It is well worth it. But I looked, I said, oh, I'm a single dad. I don't think 21,000 to give Azer a hard time. I'm like, I don't think I can fit that into my budget, but I'll have to live vicariously through the guy who got in. So.
That's exactly, yes. We're very thankful for it. We're thankful for all the people that help us raise money for a great cause.
I believe I'm also in one of your FC eliminators. I got completely auto drafted. I made my first pick, and in my second pick, I was playing a baseball game and suffered an ankle injury, and then got put on auto pick while I was in the hospital and never got to go back. So it just auto picked the last 14 rounds for me.
I'm sure that's a really solid squad.
Well, that's who's going to win a Scott Fish Bowl. They're just going to be auto picked this year. It happens every year. So
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Heath. It's been fun. I appreciate you taking the time to join me for a little bit.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. This has been Studs and Duds with Heath Cummings. Again, I am Aaron St. Dennis, the FF Mad Scientist. You can catch my work at Player Profiler, DLF, King Fantasy Sports, and the League Winners. This has been the Mad Science Lab podcast. Thanks again, Heath, and thank you, everyone, for watching. Take care.